Some folks think that this is where the story ends, a church graveyard, a private plot, a municipal cemetery. But we tend to believe that this is where the real stories begin. And we're out to dispel the notion that dead men tell no tales. Benjamin Franklin once said, "Show me your cemeteries, and I'll tell you what kind of people you have." Avery County, located deep in the mountains of northwest North Carolina, has a number of fascinating and historic graveyards that even old Ben would have been interested in, especially since he's got some relatives buried here. But more about that later. These graveyards document the history and struggle of the people who first settled these rugged mountain highlands. Our journey to learn about these early settlers starts at the Pisgah Cemetery, located in Linville Falls, North Carolina, with Avery County historian and graveyard enthusiast Tense Banks. So I guess first of all, what cemetery are we visiting right now?
This is Pisgah Cemetery. It's a Methodist church, which is one of the first churches that was built in what is now Avery County. Of course, then it wasn't Avery County. And the cemetery serves about 5 churches. It serves Linville Falls, Altamont, 3 Mile, as well as Pisgah. So many of the old original settlers are buried here, and their families are buried here.
Who do we have in this cemetery that we're going to talk about today?
We're gonna stop and visit a grave of Henry Dellinger, who was one of the first Dellingers to come in this area, which is one of the larger families here in the area, and also Samuel Franklin, who was the first permanent white settler of Linville Falls. And then I wanted to mention a little bit about Jacob Carpenter, because even though he's not buried in this cemetery, this was his church.
Jacob Carpenter, or as he was known to most, Uncle Jake, was a fascinating character. Born in 1833 on 3 Mile Creek, he began keeping a regular diary fairly early in his life. Every time someone he knew passed away, he would record the person's name, the date of death, and a brief note about the deceased. And over the course of 75 years, he recorded the deaths of 249 people in what he called his son of a gun book or jot 'em down book. After his death, his recordings were compiled into what has become known as Uncle Jake Carpenter's Anthology of Death. Most of Uncle Jake's recordings were very short, often just a single sentence. Here's one of his longest ones. 1852. Charles Kinney, age 72, died May 10th. He was a farmer, lived on the mountain at Blue Ridge at Kinney Gap. He had 4 women, married to one of them. The other 3 lived on the farm. All of the women went to the field to work, raising grain and corn, and all went to the smokehouse where they butchered 75 to 80 hogs a year. The women never complained about him having so many women, but in today's time, there would be hair pulled. There were 42 children who would all go preaching together, and everybody got along smooth. He made brandy all of his life, never had any foes, got along with everyone. I knew him, Jacob Carpenter. This is Henry Dellinger.
Yes.
What do we know about Henry?
Well, when I first started coming to the cemetery as a little girl, all my parents, my grandparents, my great-great, all my ancestors are buried here. So we would come to the cemetery at least 2 or 3 times a month to bring flowers. And I would always stop here and read this one. Now this is the soapstone that people used to put up. Most of the early graves didn't have anything but just rocks.
Right.
And this one was a marker, and they had scratched in it with a nail, which is how the old timers did it. And this says, think of me as you pass by, so as you are, so once was I. So as I am, so you shall be. Prepare therefore to follow me. And
Wow.
I memorized that when I was a little girl, and it's gone now. It's not even there
It's worn
anymore.
off.
It's worn off. But I always was fascinated by that, and so that was one of my early interests in the cemetery, was to read some of the poetry and the things that the old timers wrote on there, and also to think about what he said. You know, he was at one time walking just like we are, and when he was buried here, all of his children, of course, actually stood on this ground.
Right.
So to me, the cemetery is more interesting than going on the internet or, you know, even looking at records, because where we're standing, his family once stood. And he came here from Lincolnton, but his family was originally from Germany, and he was a millwright. He started milling, and he when he moved here with his sons, they lived on 3 Mile, but they built their mills over on Camp Creek.
As a miller, Henry Dellinger would have been a vital resource to the local community. Everyone would have brought their corn to him to be ground into meal. And when he died, Uncle Jake recorded it.
He says Henry Dellinger, age 90, died October 25th, 1851. Was farmer, worked everybody except his Emily. He made ditches. So there was one child that he didn't make work. Everybody else had to work except her, so I don't know what was special about her. But his daughter-in-law, who married his son Reuben, who was also a mill person, when she was 46, she was doing the mill herself, and her dress got caught in the mill, and she was there by herself, and she had small children. And it says she was killed in the mill. Her dress was caught round shaft, and she was mashed flat against the train. Wow. She lay for 3 hours in the mill before she was found. June the 11th, 1859. I helped pull her out, Jacob Carpenter.
Wow.
And that's the only one he attached his name to. But she's buried here in Pisgah, and then after that happened, her husband took the mill apart and carried it over to Bakersville in Mitchell County, and it still is operating over there.
I don't think many people know that Avery County has a connection to Benjamin Franklin. What's that connection?
Well, one of the first white settlers in the lower end of what's now Avery County was Samuel Franklin. And he had come here from the Johns River section, and his father had settled in the Johns River section after the Revolutionary War. He'd received a land grant for his service in the war, and he was the son of a brother of Benjamin Franklin. Benjamin's brother John had a son John, and that John was his father. So Samuel was Benjamin Franklin's actual great nephew. So Samuel Franklin had come to what's now Burke County, but he came up and settled on what's Humpback Mountain, the side of Humpback Mountain, and his family is still there. The Franklin family is still there, and most of the people in Linville Falls and a lot of people in Avery County are descendants of Samuel Franklin. He had 6 sons and 1 daughter. I'll read you what Jack Carpenter said in his anthology. Samuel Franklin, age 94, died July 12, 1857. He was a farmer, hewed logs for houses. No man could beat him. So according to Jacob Carpenter, Samuel Franklin had a reputation for building houses out of the huge chestnut trees that were in this area at the time. And there are probably 6 or 7 houses still in Linville Falls that are still standing that were built out of logs that Samuel Franklin hewed.
Now you're related to the Franklins.
I was a Franklin before I was married.
Okay, so. And
my father Albert Franklin was a 4th grandson of Samuel Franklin.
All right, so who do we have here?
This is a tombstone of a man named Robert Street. His mother was a Franklin, and after he left here, he became a very important person in North Carolina politics and business. He graduated from Harvard Divinity School. He was a lawyer, real estate, many things, but he always came back to Linville Falls, his home, and he wanted to be buried here. And so he and his wife were both buried here.
The interesting thing to me is that it lists her as lawyer, homemaker, but also patriot.
Patriot. Yep.
You don't really think of that, but obviously it doesn't really matter. If a person is a patriot, they love their country. It doesn't matter
how they serve it.
Right.
That's exactly right. She was awarded the George Washington Honor Medal of Freedom at Valley Forge for bringing about a better understanding of the American way of life. We could use her now, couldn't we?
I think so.
And that's what I find interesting about cemeteries. People think, well, you're just sort of ghoulish. You're thinking about dead people, but to me, it's not the time they were born or the time they died, but the time in between, the little dash in there that is the life of that person. And when I come to a cemetery, I look at the fact that those people, not that they died, but that they lived, and that they lived has an effect on all of us still today.
Absolutely.